Coming up on this week's edition of Sunday Nation, we're looking at the state of Alabama. Westfield High School and the former students of Westfield High School are speaking about their experiences during Jim Crow. We also have Cynthia Pasky, the President and CEO of Strategic Staffing Solutions, talking to us here on Sunday Nation. And of course, a special tribute to the late Bishop P.A. Brooks, the former senior pastor of the New St. Paul Tabernacle Church of God in Christ, who was also the first assistant presiding bishop of Kojic. It's all coming up on this week's edition of Sunday Nation. All right, welcome back to Sunday Nation. Let's bring in one of Detroit's leading business leaders, Cynthia Pasky. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you, Bankole. It's an honor to be here.
Yes, I wanted to talk to you. Of course, this 2023. It's already February, but one issue that keeps coming up is, of course, Detroit is changing in many ways. And the role of corporate social responsibility here, how should business leaders, what their contribution should be in this, what I call continued social economic evolution of Detroit. And you've been outspoken on a number of things, but I want to begin by just getting your take about where you see the city years from now.
Okay, well, that's a significant but very important topic, right? And
right.
It has a lot of elements to it. I think. As you know, I've lived in the city since 1986 proper, and my grandparents settled in the city in 1911, right? My dad graduated from Pershing. So Detroit is our home, and it's part of who we are. I think the city has an opportunity to be a place that welcomes many, and that diversifies where its jobs come from, and the manner in which people are employed. But it also has some challenges to get there. And part of the answer is education. Part of the answer is what I would call your non-traditional education. And then recognizing that everybody in our city, we're the same because we live there, right? But we're very, very different in what's been offered to us as we started out in our journey and where we're at, and finding ways to engage that entire population. So we could be a really good city that's really unique, that keeps an edge to it. That has sports and music and culture and styles and fashion, but for that to be sustainable, it has to include all of Detroit.
Yeah, and I think that's where the rubber meets the road. That's the bottleneck, the question of economic inclusion. We see a lot of stuff happening downtown, Midtown, and so forth. And the question kept coming up, what the role of corporate Detroit. And what I want you to do is just talk about in terms of how you approach this subject from the perspective of a strategic staffing solution, which has been a long time, as you indicated, headquartered here in the city of Detroit.
Right.
And what inclusion looks like, because we are wrestling with this question, and for a lot of Detroiters, I mean, they don't see their lives being included in all the glitter. I call it the Taj Mahal, if you will, of downtown, whether it's a skyscraper being built and so forth.
Well, I think that I think what a corporation should do. I think a corporation has and should recognize they have an obligation to contribute and support wherever they're based, and also wherever they have a large population of workers. Any place that a corporation derives wealth from, part of the top priority should be to share that back. And you know, whether or not they were criticized for their internal business styles, when you look at like an Andrew Carnegie,
Right.
that was always the way he ran his corporation after he developed his wealth. Responsible for thousands of libraries, right? Because he didn't have an opportunity to have an education, so reading was his opportunity. And at S3 we believe the same thing, and we believe that while we're not the largest corporation, we believe that in the 32 plus years we've been in business, we've had an opportunity that we take very seriously to set the bar high for what a corporation should do. So there's the more traditional ways that I think are the easier ways, right? You can say, I'm going to write a check to this. I'm going to sponsor this. I might have a leadership team member sit on a board. And we do that. We're a very large contributor, as you know. And if you're going to be a member of the S3 leadership team anywhere in the world, you have to engage hands-on as a board member with a nonprofit. But then there's the ways that's the one category. The second category is for the executives to be able to position themselves to have a level of influence, to have an opportunity to drive change, and more importantly, before they can do that, understand what the environment they're in. And then I think the third way, which is the most impactful in our opinion, is to find a way to create opportunities for individuals from all backgrounds, all levels, to engage in the workforce, to engage with your corporation, and to be clear and honest about the barriers they may face, and as a corporation find a way to remove them.
Yeah.
So I put it in the three different categories.
And you put a lot in there. You know, the question of the workforce. You know, how diverse it is. You know, does the workforce come from your community, or you know, are we? You know, and nothing wrong with getting people from San Francisco, New York, and other places. But I want to touch on what you talked about earlier, and that is, you believe that a company ought to be able to invest in a community where it makes wealth from. Now, we don't see, you know, and you know, in my interactions, I don't see many industry captains who speak from that lens. Why do you feel that that is very important?
You know, as you know, I didn't have an opportunity to go to university. So my view on how you run a business is based on a variety of things. Obviously, one, the opportunity for Paul and I have to work together, but also to look at like an Andrew Carnegie, a J.P. Morgan, and say, how did they do this? And there was no social pressure when Andrew Carnegie said, I'm going to fund libraries. There was nobody saying you have to do this, you have to include this. He had a reputation for being pretty ruthless with his workers. And I looked at that and I said, yeah, he just really believed that if you're going to take wealth from a community where your business is, part of your obligation should be to give wealth back, and then also to find a way to help individuals create that themselves. So there's a difference. You can write a check, but in many instances, more importantly, is you can say, how can I structure all of the different roles that I have in my corporation for individuals to now have an opportunity to create their own income that is, by definition, their own wealth, right? And we absolutely believe it, and S3 has lived that every day for over 30 years.
On the question of workforce diversity, I have seen corporations come out and talk about how great and wonderful they are, and you know what they've done, and they can show you checks that they've written to legacy groups, organizations, and so forth. But when you look at their workforce, it doesn't reflect you know, the community in Detroit. I want to talk about that in the context of S3 and why you think you know, the question of workforce diversity ought to be more than just, you know, issuing a press release, but it has to be reflected in the internal operation of the company.
It has to be reflected, and it has to be in every element of it. And so it's one of the things that we've observed, both with giving people an opportunity to engage in a position perhaps they've never done before, or perhaps their CV, resume doesn't line up particularly with a need, or a veteran. You see the same thing with the veteran population, right? Everyone says they have a veterans program, and but reality is, when you look at the numbers that are there, it's really pretty limited. And there's a couple ways to look at it. It's in our mind, we say, when we drill it down from a numbers standpoint, we say our cost of hire is less if we employ real people to talk to people about whether or not they will fit an opportunity, because our retention is higher, and that lowers our cost. A lot of large corporations say, we need to automate that process, we need to have it very structured, we need to have it very rigid. Well, what happens is, so many viable, talented individuals, they're never going to make it through a process like that, and no one's going to know they didn't make it, because they won't be seen. And so you have to decide where you're going to make your investments in talent acquisition. We've decided that we're most successful when we invest in a lot of individuals, we call them sources and recruiters, that will actually do the work to find the talent, to speak to the talent, to screen the talent. And the only time we bring automation in is to keep track of that information, or when we get to the point where we need to test for a technical skill, or engineering skill, or a healthcare skill. We do not use it to decide whether or not someone is worthy of an opportunity to be spoken to about the opportunity.
So let me move this needle to what is so obvious in Detroit, and that is the rate of poverty in the city. It's one of the most impoverished cities in the country, and I'm wondering, when I look at the economic climate, I keep asking myself the question: do some of our business leaders go to sleep at night feeling comfortable that they operate in a city that has so much, inequality? And what role do they see themselves in playing, in reducing that inequality? How do they address this issue? Or is it a question of just showing up to work every day, going to the DAC and looking at your bottom line and make sure that the bell rings on NASDAQ and you're good to go, your investors and your board of directors are happy, and that's all you care about?
Well, I mean, if you're a publicly traded company, you have to keep your board happy, and you have to keep your investors happy, right?
I know, yeah.
And it's like, you've heard me say this. I always remind my team, we have to be a financially successful team in order to do all of the things that we want to do and to have the impact that we have. I think that for some corporations and for some CEOs, I don't think they have a lens that is offered to them, even within their own corporations, to understand that the environment that they're really in. I think some choose not to see it, and that's not unique to Detroit. It's not unique to the United States. And I think some feel like they see it, but they really don't. And if I had an answer to that, I would try and implement it. I think that in order to actually engage in meaningful change, you have to really understand the environment that you're in, and you have to be confident enough to say, I understand that we have issues that are around poverty, and you also have to be willing to say that you're going to have a portion of your population that many times circumstances that are generational and beyond their control, they can't get out of that cycle. And it doesn't mean they should be abandoned. It means that they deserve the most available resources to ensure that they have an appropriate, safe, clean, healthy lifestyle. And then the individuals around them that are able and willing to say, I want to break this cycle, you have to intentionally remove the barriers, and then you have to support them through a process. I think a lot of people tend to say, well, jobs should eliminate poverty, but
I mean, it's a blanket statement.
It doesn't work. It might work in certain circumstances, but overall, it's taking the time to understand, how did someone end up in that situation? I had, as you know, we have our leadership team. We call it the Cindy Book Club, but I pick different books for them to read. And last year, one of the books we read was $2 a day. and it was incredibly well researched, and it followed groups of individuals that found a way to basically live on the equivalent of $2 a day. And it told their story of how they'd ended up like that. So many times it was 3 generations. It wasn't everything everybody would assume. A lot of instances it had nothing to do with addiction, it had nothing to do with drugs, it was bad choices, or they had to leave school to take care of a family member, and they had somehow figured out to work in a gray economy and to survive on $2 a day. And it was a reminder to our team that every city that we're in and every place we have the opportunity to engage talent, there are groups of people that is where they're at.
Well, you know, so as you're speaking, I'm thinking, because even in the corporate boardroom, whether it's in Detroit or perhaps any other city, this notion that poverty is generational, can be generational, and that people who are trapped in this cycle, you know, endlessly are caught up in this cycle, and that in order to help them, it has to go just beyond the symptom. And in the corporate boardroom, I mean, those are conversations that, you know, are not normally held.
Right.
You know, the question though is, how do we get this issue of poverty, you know, being a generational economic impediment, becoming, you know, a regular conversation in a corporate boardroom, you know, sitting side by side with the numbers or the number cruncher telling us how much profits we made this month and how the investors are so excited that it becomes a human concern for corporations in Detroit and other places.
I think it requires a couple of things. I think corporate boards need to look for leaders that recognize that the corporation has to be successful.
Yeah.
And that also the corporation has to engage in the community. And there are CEOs out there that are very good at that and that do that. I think you can drill almost any corporation down to the point where you can say, if we have a talent shortage, we probably have the answer we need if we found the way to remove barriers to give these individuals a chance. And the cost of not having talent is very significant for a corporation. And then I think anyone that has a product, I mean, if you want to take the caring side away, even though you and I would both like to see CEOs recognize and care, right? Even if you took that side away, reality is, as you work on this problem, you create more consumers for your product. So there's, the way I would like to see it is corporations go, this is part of what we're supposed to do. But my other way of talking about it is, even if you don't believe that, or it's not in the fiber of who you are, reality is your cost of hire will go down if you find a way to reach those individuals, remove the barriers, and have them start to become part of your workforce. And your sales will go up. If they have an opportunity to bring income into their household, they can now buy more of your product or buy your product for the first time, like a car. So idealistically, the one side of Cindy would say, I wish every CEO recognized that they have an obligation to engage in their communities and to drill down and understand how to do that, not just by writing checks. The other side of Cindy says, if you can't do that, then recognize that you can reduce your costs, address your talent issues, and increase your sales if you do the exact same thing.
So final question, the corporate boardroom is still not diverse, racially and gender-wise as well. What is it like for you being in some of these spaces, which is very highly macho, and in most of the cases it's an all-boys network?
Well, one of the things that we have always done is we are financially strong, and you know that that's very important to us, and we have a reputation of being very good at what we do. So when we walk in to compete and we walk in to sit at the table, we walk in with that strength behind us. And it doesn't mean, most of the time you wouldn't want to be invited to dinner with anyone at that table, but from a business standpoint, you need to be at that table to have an opportunity,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So part of it is understanding what your real perspective is.
Yeah.
And then the other part is don't approach it from, I would like them to like me and respect me. Approach it from, we are so good and we are so strong that it is too hard for them to not say, perhaps we should talk to them about this opportunity.
Yeah.
And then never lose sight of who you actually want at your dinner table.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
All right.
All right.
Cynthia Pasky, Detroit business leader, the president, CEO and founder of Strategic Staffing Solutions, here talking to us on Sunday Nation. Stay with us. We'll be right back.